thank you guys for joining our Do You Have a Picky Eater virtual training tonight. We are so excited to have Joan Medlin joining us tonight for this training and to share some incredible insights with us. As you heard, we are recording this training so that folks that registered and couldn't make it, or folks that might need to access this information at a later date on our website, will be able to watch this training. So just know if you have your camera on or if you're unmuting that this will be a recorded presentation tonight. Before we jump in to our content, I'm going to take a quick moment just to introduce who I am. My name is Callie Cackley. I am the lead program coordinator here at Central Oregon Disability Support Network. And it's my experiences as a parent. My role as a mom is what brings me to this work. Our first child was born with Down syndrome. Her name is Mia. We did not know before she was born that she would be joining us with an extra chromosome. So she has actually been the most incredible surprise of our lives. And I'm so grateful just for all the experiences that we've had as a parent and as a family that have grown us, and also how much we've learned that we can share with others as they are also going through different experiences raising kids with disabilities. So it's the lens of my lived experience as a parent is what has helped me want to have high expectations for my kiddo and how to have a clear vision for her future, and really wanting to support other families that are navigating disability has led me to want to do this work in my job at CODSN. So I'm so excited to be with you guys tonight. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Damaris and let her introduce herself as well.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Damaris Elix, one of the bilingual program coordinators here in Central Oregon Disability Support Network. I have three wonderful children. That each one has shown me that work in three different ways. But my role as a mom who bring me here, it's my 15 years old, Javier, who experienced cerebral palsy. And after 9 years later, my youngest son, Mateo, was born, who experienced sensory challenge and anxiety. My experience as a family navigating disability is what drives me to be here and to encourage to make change and build a better place for myself, for my son, for my kiddos, and for another families who experience a disability, especially for the Spanish-speaking families. Yeah. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you, Damaris. And so Damaris is going to be running the chat tonight, answering questions. She's going to be putting different links in and information. And if you're having any tech issues or if you have questions, reach out to Damaris as the presentation is going on, because she can see the chat and take care of that. Okay, so a little bit really quick before we dive in with Joan, I want to share a little bit about what we do at CODSN. If you've not heard of CODSN, or if you're new to our network, I'm just going to take a moment to kind of share a little bit about who we are and what we do. So CODSN stands for Central Oregon Disability Support Network, and we are a nonprofit that offers peer-delivered support to families navigating disability in 8 rural Oregon counties. So our mission is to promote a positive understanding of disability and create an inclusive community, as well as to be a source of support, information, and education for families and professionals. So our staff are all members, family members or individuals that experience a disability, and we partner and help families through that lens to navigate any different system that they might encounter on their journey with disability. So we will connect you to resources as well as other families and through kind of our lived experience as parents and individuals. So we do quite a few things. We are a community parent resource center. So we have a 5-year grant from the Federal Office of Special Education Programs to implement work as a CPRC, is the acronym for Community Parent Resource Center. And we serve Crook, Deschutes, Grant, Harney, Jefferson, Klamath, Lake, and Wheeler counties through that grant. We also offer new parent support, so families that are just receiving a diagnosis. And we also have new parent binders and provide one-on-one calls, support, and help as families are navigating it for the first time and helping make connections with other families. We also do connection and peer-delivered support through support groups and providing opportunities for families to connect with each other through our quarterly family events so that families can really build relationships and network with each other. We have bilingual staff. Damaris is one of our bilingual program coordinators. We actually have 3 bilingual program coordinators staff that serve our community, that help our Spanish-speaking families and offer all of our trainings and materials in Spanish. We provide, like what you're accessing tonight, trainings and webinars, both at different local organizations and businesses, and we also provide things on our website, some recorded trainings and on-demand trainings. We also provide trainings in our community around accessibility and helping schools and businesses and different organizations be more accessible for all people in our community. So we do a lot of those disability awareness types of trainings as well. We support families around special education, help equip them to share their voice and advocate for their child. So we help them to kind of learn the different skills and tools that they will need so they can go advocate for their children in other systems as well. We offer person-centered planning support and tools to help families to have the information that they need to be able to really give a person-centered approach in how they support their kids. We also have a lending library of all kinds of information. We provide a lot of referrals and tools and connecting to different systems as families are trying to determine if they need educational support or medical or state disability services. We really help connect families to all the systems that are available. We know that can be overwhelming. We also do help families learn how to advocate on the federal, state, and community level. So we represent families on many different statewide systems meetings, but we also support families to learn how to share their voice and their story and engage with those that are making decisions at the state and community levels as well. So we really love to support families. If you couldn't tell by that little spiel, we do a lot of different work. We have a Rising Stars program that helps support families. If you are in Crook, Deschutes, or Jefferson County, and you have a child that has not yet started kindergarten, there's a specific grant program that we have that helps us provide for medical or non-insurance covered supports that families might need. So we have a lot of different ways to support families. Often it's best just to call or send us an email, just to ask the questions you have, and we can see if there's something that we have that can maybe help you or support you in what you're dealing with and what you're working through. So before we dive in, I want to just give one last housekeeping announcement. If you hopped in late, I want to make sure that you heard the announcement that we are doing Spanish interpretation for tonight. So if you are doing that for the very first time, there should be a button that has a globe at the bottom of your screen. You need to click that globe and you need to mark English or Spanish so that you are hearing tonight's presenter in the language that you want to hear it in. Another important detail, be respectful of who else is in the room. If you could please mute during the presentation so that our presenter can get through her material, and then at the end we will be answering questions. You can put your questions in the chat box, which is in your control panel there at the bottom, and at the end we will have a time for questions, or if you would rather just raise your hand or unmute and ask questions at the end, that is absolutely an option. We do have closed captioning enabled as well, if that is a support that would help you access tonight's training. So I think that is everything we have. And then again, we are recording tonight's training just so that you know, so it can be up on our website for others. So with that, I would love to get started and pass it off here to our trainer. Our trainer tonight is Joan Medlin. Joan is she's our dietitian, author, and parent trainer for tonight. So her journey as a dietitian changed dramatically the day that her son was born with Down syndrome. So she focuses her diverse experiences on supporting quality lives and quality health for people with disabilities of all ages and their families. So we are so, so grateful, Joan, to have you with us to share your expertise on this important topic about how to support our kiddos and picky eaters. So with that, I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and let Joan take over.
Well, let's see if Joan can do it. I'm going to choose that screen. And everything disappears when I do that, right? So
we can see your screen, though. That is a good thing. We can see.
That's a good sign. I have to put my glasses on to read these little words because I like the chat box up. Where'd my chat box go? I'm going to put it over here so I can see it. All right. I don't know why I can't see. There's my chat box. Okay. So good evening, everybody. Really good to see you. And as Callie mentioned, I am also a mother of Andy. You see him over there on the right with his father, Rex. Andy's now 34. I didn't graduate him after his birthday, so I ran around NDSC all last week saying he was 33 and realized, oh no, he's 34. That's bad. So Andy is 34 and has taught me more than I could have learned in school or anywhere else. He's just been the best teacher. Both of my boys taught me more about life and being a dietitian than school ever did. I wanted to start today, and webinars are always so sort of anxiety producing because I can't see you and I don't know what's going on, can't see the looks on your face. So I wanted to start with a poll. So let's see if this works. Oops. Oh, no, that worked. All right. Oh, and it still has my test on there. Sorry about that. The test is the HHH. Here's the instructions. And they look kind of little to me. But you just go to pollev.com, type in Joan Medlin, one word, all E's, and then it will ask you the question, and then feel free to type in an answer, or you can join by text, and the instructions are there on the right. And my question is just, what one thing would you like to take away from today? So that I can get a feel for what it is that you're interested in, what it is that I need to focus in on. I wish I could clear my HHH off there, but I'm just going to leave it for now. And we'll see those responses coming in as you type them. I'll give you a minute for that. And let me know if that's a problem. Oops, it went back. I gotta go back. Here we go. I'm not seeing any responses.
I just put the link in the chat as well, so people could click right to it. But one person responded in the chat, how to help my son.
Oh, okay, how to help my son. Woo, sorry about that. My glasses came off. The writing on my laptop screen is really small. So I managed to clear off my HHH. So we'll leave that there for a second. Callie asked me to talk about picky eating today, and I think what I'm going to do is that while you're typing in, I'm just going to go ahead and go forward, and we'll come back to see if something else comes into that response. But the first thing we want to do is just talk about what we're going to talk about today, so that you have an idea of the path that we're going to go down. We're going to talk a little bit about something that's called the feeding relationship, and what our role is as parents working with our kids of all ages. This is across the lifespan. We'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about some basic nutrition. I just want to get some basic concepts across for you. And then we're going to talk about understanding sensory stages and picky eating, kind of what the difference is and what it looks like, and different little strategies that you can use to kind of work through those pieces. And then just some stories about expanding people's palettes and tools. And I brought all of my handy modified kitchen tools into the den here so that I could share with you as time goes on. So let me switch back to our little response slide and see if there's anything there. Understand how to help my son, how to help expand food choices and encourage healthy choices in light of sensory challenges, learn different stages, anything nutrition related to picky eating. Help my daughter enjoy meals and not have it be a battle day in and out. That's a big one. How to provide positive experiences around food. All of those are really appropriate for today and really good. So we will touch on pieces of all of those. If I need to expand on them, please let me know. I'm happy to do that in this forum. All right, so we've done our menu. So let's go a little bit forward. Now, one of the things that I like to start with is just this sort of foundation. So let's just talk about wellness. Whenever I do a talk, everybody, we're all here because what we want is a quality life for our child. And this is something that's called the wellness wheel. And the wellness wheel kind of looks at all the different categories that people analyze in life. And so there's the environment, what's going on in the environment. There's the physical, that's your physical health. There's school or work, and we know that school really kind of impacts things at times. There's mental health or mental wellness, your social life, your spiritual life, whatever you choose. All of those things are part of the pie for wellness. And we look at all of those areas. And, it gets overwhelming when you read those articles, 5 ways to live your healthiest life. You can't be perfect in all of them. But when one of them is a problem, so let's say if you're having a physical problem, that's going to take up a bigger part of the pie. Your focus is going to be on that physical piece and going to take up more space. And all the others kind of get squished. So the idea is to try to balance them around. But when we're talking about people who experience disabilities, oftentimes there's something that kind of gets in the way. And anybody have an idea of what might get in the way of our perception of a quality of life and being able to access that? Just type it in the chat if you want. And I'm just going to go ahead and call it out because I'm always afraid I'll run out of time. And it's basically diagnostic overshadowing, but it can be defined in a number of ways. So one is we all have a different idea of what health and safety is for our son or daughter. Then we have the issue around choice, and what does that mean, and how do we make choices? And sometimes you have people telling you that your son or daughter can't make a choice. That's always an interesting moment. And then there's rights. What are the person's rights, and what are our responsibilities, and how does that work with self-determination? There's the role modeling component. We all need to be modeling the expected behavior, and we need to surround them with people who model the expected behavior. That's a little bit rough. There's the training of ourselves and the people who support our child. Do they really have the training that they need to be able to support them effectively? And at the center of all of that needs to be, we mitigate that by using something called person-centered thinking. So if we're really being person-centered about how we do things, then we can kind of get there. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute. So today, what we're going to focus on is a little bit of the definition of health and safety, a lot about choice, and a little bit about role modeling. And again, it's all going to be centered around person-centered thinking. So we need to use a person-centered approach. So a person-centered approach begins with trust. And it's a promise to listen with the intent to hear, act on what you hear them say, and then be honest about what you can and cannot do. So that's the core of person-centered thinking. You're building trust with someone. So all of my work around nutrition uses this approach. And for picky eating and any kind of eating when kids are younger and throughout their lives, I use something that's called the feeding relationship. This was created by a woman named Ellen Satter. You may have heard of her. She wrote Child of Mine, Feeding with Love and Good Sense. That's the core of her work, or where she started. And that was about, I want to say around 1995-ish that she put this out, was doing traveling, telling everyone. She's a dietitian and a social worker out of Canada, and she did a bunch of research. And she came up with this feeding relationship. It says parents are responsible for what, where, when, and how food is presented, and children are responsible for how much and whether or not it's eaten. And often I get a lot of pushback on that children shouldn't be given that much control, but That's okay. We can talk about that because there's a lot of responsibilities on both ends that make it easy for children to choose and listen to their bodies on how much and whether or not food is eaten. But when she presented this the first time, she said, this is appropriate for all children except for children with disabilities. And anyone who knows me knows that's not the thing to say, because I'll just come back with, why not? So I did that. I started asking the question, why not? And what I came up with was that there's one big difference between parents of kids with disabilities and parents of kids without, and that is all these extra people who are in our lives. And you see them there in that list: the nurse, the social worker, the dietitian, the early intervention teacher, the babysitter, the respite worker, the speech pathologist, the occupational therapist, the physical therapist, the behavior consultant, the grandmother, the aunt, the neighbor, and the lady at the grocery store all have an opinion about how we feed our kids. And somehow, they seem to think that we, because our kids have an extra chromosome or a developmental disability, a difference, that we must need extra help. That's always how it felt to me. So I really thought about that. And the reality is those supports, the people, maybe the PSW that you hire, or the babysitter or whomever, say it's the speech path who's helping out at school. We are also responsible for what, where, when, and how food is presented to your loved one within the parameters of your family values, as long as it does not do harm to the child. And what that means is you still get to be mom and dad. You still get to say, this is how we value food. So, for instance, all of my kids are both grown. And when they were growing up, it was super important to me that we had one meal a day together. I believe in a family meal. So my husband was working graveyard when they were super little. So what we did was at 3:30, we this is the sign for where, and I would just look at the two kids and I'd say, where's dad? And they'd go running down the hall to wake him up, because the meal we have together is dinner. So dinner's at 5 o'clock, and we would eat our dinner and spend our time together. And it turned out really well. When Ryan was in college, he knew that if he showed up at 5 o'clock, he could get dinner. I wouldn't turn him away, and he could bring friends, and I wouldn't turn them away. It might get interesting, but I wouldn't turn them away, because 5 o'clock was family dinner. The downside of it is that Andy now believes that dinner's at 5, not 4:55, not 5:05, but 5 o'clock straight up. And if we're early or late, that's a problem. So therein you have how we've worked that out. But if you want to lead, if say you are a vegetarian, that's something you get to hang on to. You don't have to change just because people are supporting you. You can make these decisions, and so don't let go of that part that's your family. But the other part that's different for us is that as they grow up and they step out on their own and start to spread their wings, they're now responsible for what, where, when, and how food is eaten, as well as how much or whether or not it's eaten. But we're still in the picture as the support. We engineer things, we set up the environment for success, we mentor, we're parents and kind of colleagues as they begin to find their way in life. So we never really leave this spot. We're always kind of in it. So the beauty of the feeding relationship is that if you're following it, what ends up happening, if you learn to trust your son or daughter to listen to their cues, they're going to eat in a way that sustains their body. The research tells us that when using this feeding relationship approach, children are able to eat in a way that they get the vitamins and minerals that they need. There's always some reason to have concern about that when your child has a developmental disability. So you might want to just consider an over-the-counter vitamin to fill in the blanks. But for the most part, the research tells us that we should just trust them to be able to do this themselves. It's a hard thing to do. And I didn't share about Andy earlier. My youngest son has Down syndrome. He also has celiac disease. He also has autism. He also has developed seizures in his adulthood. And he is a man of very few words. In fact, he uses just one word approximation that gets us around, and we use pictures and gestures to kind of navigate our days. And when I list off all of those labels, someone would say, well, how could you trust him to know what he's eating and that he's feeding his body well? And if you look at food as an average over time, with the exception of how we get our energy, but the vitamins and the minerals as an average over time, what my husband and I have come to realize is that Andy really does listen to his body. When he's not well, he doesn't eat much. When he's well, he eats an appropriate amount, because we've used this process of letting him trust himself and trusting him to do that. He actually doesn't eat when he's not hungry, with one exception, and that is chocolate. So when the staff would bring out, say, they'd bring out chips to be a food reinforcer, like, come on, you can work for the chips. And Andy's like, I don't want to work for the chips. I'm not hungry. But when I'm hungry, I want you to give me the chips anyway. So that was a helpful tool for me when I was trying to discourage the use of food rewards in the classroom. And hopefully that's continuing in other areas. But the other piece of this for us is that there's research that tells us that when parents of a child with a developmental disability, and this research was done with parents of children with autism, spina bifida, and Down syndrome. And what they found was when the family was under stress and when weight became an issue or feeding at all was brought up in any kind of medical situation, that parents began to use more controlling behaviors, be more like the food police, to like really control what their kid is eating and how much, and forcing, kind of doing some of that force of, you need to clean your plate and all of those things. And those controlling food practices are really counterproductive and lead to some negative behaviors around food. So with all of that research, we want to really work on making mealtime a positive experience. That somebody wrote in their comments, make it a positive experience, something that we can all build on and learn from. So that's how I approach picky eating, is I approach it with, we're going to learn how to think about our role in the feeding relationship. We're going to learn about how to support our son or daughter who might be a little bit picky without becoming a short order cook. And then we're going to look at how we can build on those skills and expand their palate so that they're eating more foods over time in a positive way. So with that, I have this piece. It's just some very, very bare bones fundamental nutrition that I want to bring across to you. So we have our next question in the poll. How much time between eating? How much time do you think people need between eating? And it's the same website. And think about it as age 3 and up. I'm not quite sure how this has you answer it. I'm going to wait here for a minute.
It just has you click on a number, Joan, to answer it.
You can click on the number.
But you have to put your name in first on your first screen. And then once you put your name in, it'll give you the option to click a number.
So sorry.
Can you see any responses yet, Joan? Is it working? Can you see what?
Oops, not yet. Oh, I do. I see one right there. Oh, 3 on the 3 hour. Look at this. I have to like get right up here next to the screen to see these little green things on there. So we've got some people saying 3 hours. We've got a 4 hour. We've got a 2 hour. We've got a 4 in the chat. Okay. So you're doing okay there. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on. Boy, those are really hard to see. I have to choose a different color next time. All right. So here's the answer for you. So how much time between eating? Well, take a look at our 1 to 5, and here comes our curve. It's 3 to 5 hours. And the reason that it's 3 to 5 hours is for this reason. No matter what you're eating, your body's first going to grab the carbohydrate in the food that you just ate. So that carbohydrate is say in the bread, in the pasta, in the fruit. There's carbohydrate in fruit. There's some carbohydrates in milk, and then any, of course, candy or pop or whatever. And the simple carbohydrates, let's see if I can grab a pointer up here. Annotate, it says. I'm going to grab a spotlight. All right. So the simple carbohydrates, they start right here. And in this first part, can you see that little thing going along? So in this first little bit of the curve, that's where like the sugar from pop or whatever, Gatorade is going to be that high fructose corn syrup is this first little bit. Then comes the more complex carbohydrates, and those are going to be the things that come from, say, beans and whole wheat and pasta are going to be in this piece, and they start to get up here towards the top. And when we get at the tippy top right here, that's when protein starts to kick in. So your body's had enough time to break down the protein and grab what energy exists in a protein that you've eaten. So if you've had some milk, you've been using the carbohydrate from the milk up to here. Then up here, you start to use that protein, and it takes you over, takes you over to about here. And then right about here is when fat pulls in, and you get just a teeny tiny little bit of energy from fat, and it will take you to the end. But if you're not eating by 5 hours there, you are probably going to experience hangry. We all know hangry. It's not very fun. And if your son or daughter has a disability and it comes out in a behavior, then the school's going to be calling you to say, hey, we got a behavior here. So one of the reasons I bring this up is because if you have a child who's younger and going to school, I'm going to tell you a little story. I had a friend who they would get up at 5:30, and they would eat breakfast between 5:45 and 6:15, 6:30. The bus comes at 7 o'clock. So they had just a half hour or so to get themselves dressed. So they get themselves dressed and ready to go. And then the bus, it took an hour to get to school. So we don't get to school till 8. And remember, we ate breakfast at around 6:15. So they get to school at 8. School starts at 8:15. We're now at 2 hours, right? And then lunch isn't until 11. So if I had 3 hours on there, I have 5 hours. And she called me because her child was getting written up for behavioral outbursts right before lunch. And you can clearly see, if you backtrack it, why that was happening. He's just plain hungry. And when I said he needs a snack, they were like, this is 3rd grade. We don't snack in 3rd grade. So then we had to do some problem solving around that individual piece in the IEP. But once we added an opportunity to snack, and the way we did that was that we had him go to school breakfast. So once he went to school breakfast and had a smaller portion of the school breakfast, then he was able to make it to lunch without having any meltdowns. So that's the reason I bring that up. It's an important piece. The other piece that's important, just based on seeing that curve, now I have to clear my animations. My little drawings clear, there. So the other thing that's important about that is that it's balanced, because you saw that carbohydrate provides the first part of your energy, and then comes protein, and then comes fat. So the easiest way to balance it, so you've got some carbohydrate, protein, and fat at each meal, is to look at it as 3 of the 5 food groups. I don't care what foods you choose, but if you put 3 of the 5 food groups together, you will get some carbohydrates, some protein, and some fat. And that's key to balance. And once we have that, then we can fine tune. So when we're talking about somebody who's a selective eater, that's something to look at. You know, if they're eating, say, a couple of bites of chicken, and then they have snap peas, and then they have applesauce, you're probably good, because you've got some, depending on where you put peas. I put it in the starch group, the starchy vegetables. We got some starchy vegetables, we got some protein, and we've got some fruit. So I've got 3 of the 5 food groups. So we're probably good. Vitamins and minerals are a little bit harder to do that with, but at least for energy, you can do that. So that's the purpose of that. Oops. So I don't know why I did that. That's in there again. We're going to move on. So now let's get into the part that you're really all here for, and I call picky eating selective eating. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to start with the sensory stages to food. So everyone processes how they see a new food the same way. We all go through the same steps. You've all heard when you had your children, your first child, that it takes 10 times to accept a new food. Well, these are the steps that everyone goes through. Kids without disabilities kind of do it in the blink of an eye, and kids with sensory issues take a little longer. We'll get to that. So the first step is to accept the presence of the food, the fact that the food even is in the house. And believe it or not, there are some people for whom a particular food being in the house can be an issue. So I'm using a picture of a Brussels sprout because I used to hate them. I've now learned to like them. But whenever I would go on a trip, my husband would come home with this beautiful stock of Brussels sprouts, and I always thought they were pretty. And he'd walk in and he'd say, "We're going to have this when you're gone." And he would, kind of gloating and trying to make me feel bad and torture me at the same time. But my mom used to just steam these things, and they smelled horrible. So it was fine that it was in the house, but once we got to the next step, which is accepting the smell of the food, that's where it all went bad for me. I just couldn't handle the smell of Brussels sprouts. And your kid might be the same. It might be the smell of the food that's what's turning them off. But once we can accept the smell of a food, then we get to explore the properties of the food. We want to know what this food is all about. So when kids are little, this is when they're smearing it all over their high chair tray, dropping it on the floor to see how it sounds, doing all the different things with it. And as you get older, you could argue that we don't do that anymore. But I'm pretty sure that if I gave you something really weird, you'd be doing the same thing on your plate. We just learn these really, what we think are going to be socially acceptable ways of exploring the properties of the food. Like we take our fork and we kind of move it around and see what it does and see what we think of it, and kind of smell it and play with it. And then maybe we'll move on to the next step, because we're adults and we're pretending to be adults, and we're going to taste the food. Now, a taste is not eating the food. It does not mean that you swallowed it. A taste means it went into your mouth or touched your lips. So when I do workshops with tasting, we have a spit cup that people can spit into. But what do we do when we're in a restaurant? We put something in our mouth that's just horrible. Oh, we find that napkin, in it goes, and off to the side, right? So that's kind of where this step is. And, you would do well to teach your child how you want them to get rid of the food that's in their mouth they just can't handle. And then that last step is actually eating the food. And that means that they've eaten it, they've chewed it, they swallowed it, and we're successful. Now for kids, that's the rule of 10, right? They're doing that in a blink of an eye, and you don't see all those steps kind of put out in front of you. But that's basically what has just happened. is that they've gone through all of those steps before they eat that new unfamiliar food. For kids with Down syndrome, I like to say that that's the rule of 100, that it's going to take more because we have sensory issues going on. So that exploring the properties outside of our mouth is one thing, and then exploring the properties inside our mouth is another thing, and the smell, all of that just takes a little bit longer. So you have to give a little more time. So when somebody's refusing a food, it doesn't mean you're not going to offer it again. It just means you might do it in a different way. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then for kids with autism, this is just kind of, it's all tongue in cheek. I would say, 10,000 trials, and then kids who have Down syndrome and autism, both, maybe 1 million. But the point is, there's no timeline that we have to fit this in on. And when you have a picky eater that's for sensory reasons, then you kind of need to give them some time to work through all of these stages and to explore these foods. And we'll talk about some ways to do that. The other reason sometimes people are more picky with their food is because they're not quite ready for the food that you're putting in front of them physically. So it's important to understand this. And this is one of the things you can download from my website if you want. This is a basic food chart when to introduce foods, but it's based on developmental stages. So across the top there, you have the food type and like puree, thick puree, ground, chopped foods, and table foods. And then down the side, we have the chewing stages, the feeding skills to note, things that should be happening when those developmental skills come into play, the things that happen at the same time. Because development's like that, things kind of come in clusters, so you'll see other things. The types of foods to offer for that food type, and then indications for the next steps, my very favorite thing, and then the cautions. So the indications for next step is my very favorite part. You can kind of go across and see the different things. And one of the things I love about working with folks with Down syndrome is that they do tend to chew with their mouth open, and so I don't have to work too hard at detecting what's happening inside their mouth. I can just watch. But what we're looking for is we're looking for the tongue to go back and forth. So that we know that they're moving things over to their side of their mouth to chew it, back and forth to chew it, rather than just mushing it up against the top of their mouth. But what I find is that most adults are kind of stuck at this spot, which is between ground and chopped foods. They never really make it all the way, well, I don't want to say never. Many do not make it to what is clinically called a mature rotary chew. So what happens here is these foods are things like those chicken nuggets, and even a McDonald's burger is something that you can mash with your tongue on the roof of your mouth. Those easy chew foods are what's happening at this stage. But that's okay. It's just for us to know that that's a typical and normal kind of thing. But that's basically what I see, is I see folks kind of getting stuck there. But we're working towards these, and they find ways to manage these that aren't necessarily what's clinically considered a mature rotary chew. So that's sort of the developmental process. You have that sensory process. How do they experience food in a sensory way? And then you have the, can I chew the food that you're providing to me? So then there's the question of, are they really a picky eater? And before you start making the list, I want to say a couple of things about picky eating. Picky eating, a true picky eater is that kid who eats really well in one place and not in another, or who has your full attention and then some at every mealtime. Like you are the short order cook making 40 things and they're figuring out what to eat. And it's sort of a control play. That's the true picky eater by definition. So typically what we have more often is the kid with the sensory issues and the developmental issues. But if there's some issues around control and all of that, then that becomes a behavioral piece. And we can kind of see that when you look at the situation and what's happening. Do they eat something for grandma and not for you? You know, those kinds of things are a sign that you have a real picky eater. But then, you know, there's some clinical signs as well. And this is how we look at it from a clinical lens. You make a list of all the foods that the person eats. And I'm going to describe the definition of a food for you. The definition of a food is one item prepared in one way. So for instance, I can take a potato and I can make it a French fry. That's one food. I can make it a potato chip. That's another food. I can make it a baked potato. That's 3 foods. I can make it a mashed potato. That's 4 foods. I can make it scallop potatoes. That's 5 foods. So hopefully you get the idea of the definition of a food. It's taking an item and preparing it in one way and serving it at a particular temperature. So that's one food. And the reason that I described that for you is because it's likely that you're going to get more than 50 foods when you make that list. If you don't make 50 foods, then you need to be talking with your physician about, I need a little more help, maybe a speech path or an occupational therapist or the dietitian, someone to talk to kind of help me with this process. If it's less than 25, then you need to be saying very clearly, I need a feeding specialist. Because if it's less than 25, the way that I'm describing it, that's a really tough place to be in, unless it's developmentally appropriate, of course. If they're like 9 months old, they might have just 25 foods. So keep that in mind. There's reasons to be looking at all of these foods. So with that in mind, I have this worksheet that I call the Food Alike worksheet. And what I do to try and help people think about how to expand a kid's food offerings, what they might be willing to accept, is just you list all of the foods that the person eats, and then start listing similar foods to the one the person eats. Similar in that the food item, like the many ways I did a potato, this is the same idea. The food item, how it's prepared, the temperature of it, the color of it, the texture of it. And we're going to try and change it just one way. So only one change. And get ready to type in the chat for me so that we can see some ideas. So what's one way that you could change a French fry? Just one way. You only have to choose it. Just one thing to change. Type it in the chat. You're all so timid. I don't like giving away my secrets until you tell me one. Yeah, there you go. Maybe air fry them or bake them, right? There's an idea. Okay, so I'll give you one. One thing that I like to make is something called oven baked parsnips. So what I've changed is I've changed the actual food item, but I cut it the same way. And add a spice, that's good. I cut it the same way, and then I cook it in the oven in the same way I would make French fries. And if you've not had a parsnip, it looks like a really anemic carrot. It's a white carrot-looking root vegetable. And when I do tasting workshops, they're very, very popular. So you'll see a picture of them coming up, but they're sweeter. They have a little more fiber than a potato, and they have more vitamins than a potato. So that's the value added. Same idea with oven-baked sweet potatoes. So there's one. All right, let's try a different one. Type away for me. I've got 2 of you going. Spaghetti noodles. What's something you could do instead of your typical white pasta spaghetti noodles? Lentil spaghetti noodles, oh, that'd be good. Yeah. So you can change that type of spaghetti noodle. You can get a different type, or spinach spaghetti noodles changes the color. You can also change the shape of the pasta, and it works with this, right? Because you're just changing one thing. So I've known kids who would only eat one one shape of macaroni and cheese. And I'm watching these mothers run around the stores looking for the Scooby-Doo macaroni and cheese. There you go, spaghetti squash with chickpea noodles, very good. So my first one was spaghetti squash, and then later I came up with zucchini cut, spiral cut noodles. You take those, make those vegetable noodles. And that can be really fun. If you, this time of year, you can get those great big zucchinis, and what do you do with them? Well, if you have a spiral cutter, you can spiralize them, and they make really long ones. Those big spaghetti squash come out of your garden. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so next up we have just taste testing. With that in mind, you take that kind of a worksheet process. You don't have to do it on a worksheet, but you then start doing some taste testing. So rather than making it a mealtime pressure cooker moment, I put this new thing on your plate, are you going to eat it? I really recommend doing it at a different time of the day, doing it like as a snack, or doing it as an activity. We're going to be food scientists. They really like to do the food scientist thing. So you could do all those things, and taste testing has to be done in a safe environment. And what that means is you have to be able to get rid of it. So if you put it in your mouth and it freaks out, you have to be able to spit it out. So you'll see on the screen here, right here is what I have for them in the workshops is a spit cup. And I've learned to tell them that, you know, we have rules about how things go in the spit cup. You don't get to show your neighbor. You don't get to make noises. You know, all of those kinds of things. But the spit cup is a really helpful thing. And that's when you teach them how to put it in their napkin, and you have lots of napkins on the table, or however it is that you want them to get rid of it. I had my niece when she was younger. She has ADD and really some issues around food, and she would just like open her mouth and drop it all out. It was kind of bad. So, and then down here at the bottom of the screen here, this is these are the oven baked parsnips that we did for a tasting workshop, and everybody was trying them out and kind of clamoring all over themselves to get at it. And so what we do when we do a tasting workshop is we start talking about the food. So rather than it being eat your food, we talk about, well, is it hot? Is it cold? Is it just right? What color is it? They have to start to think about how to describe it all. With the little ones, we get out books and we read about how it was grown, how carrots are grown, or things like that. And we sometimes roll them on the floor to see what their physical properties are before they're cooked, or we shake them to see what they sound like. We smell them. We do all of those things, and at the end, they can even kind of rate how things work. And it's a really helpful thing, and you learn an awful lot. Well, I had a young man. We did lettuce, everything from iceberg lettuce to leafy mustard green, and they had to taste everything in between. And we put butcher paper down, and they rate them with numbers on the butcher paper. And he tried every single one. So he was a fearless eater. He tried them all, but he spit every single one into his spit cup. And so afterwards, I was talking with him, and I said, "Hey, dude, what's up with this? You know, I mean, you were great. You were so brave. What is it about this food that bothers you?" And he said, "I choked on a piece of lettuce at school once, and it really scared me. I'm scared of leafy things." And that was really good information for his mom, who didn't know that he had had this traumatic experience at school. So she then knew not to focus on spinach and all of that kind of thing. There are many other vegetables you could try. So those are the kinds of things you can learn from that experience. I've had kids tell me that carrots are too sharp in my mouth. I can't handle it. It's too sharp. It's going to cut me. I've had them tell me I can't find it. I don't know where it goes in my mouth. It's lost. It's been really interesting for me as a dietitian to hear what people will tell me as they try new foods. So I developed this thing called a tasting journal, and this is another thing you'll be able to download from the website. It has different levels of writing. Some of them you just circle, and some of them have there's a place there where you can like paste the picture of the thing. The idea behind it is to build in literacy at the same time, right? But but to do it in a way that everyone can participate, and then have a record of what I tried and what I thought about it. And then when I try it again, a while later, do I think the same thing maybe? How things can change and what was different about it the second time? And for a lot of people, I say you can use this to help build your menus, to see what they like and what they don't like. You might start to see some trends around taste or around texture. And if you do it in this sort of not mealtime environment, you get a lot more information than if you do it at mealtime and everybody's feeling the pressure. Now, just having said that, I don't expect you to do this every day, maybe not even every week, but I hope that if you were to try this process, that you would do it when you're in a good space and they're in a good space, and you can even build in, let's go to the store and find a food to try and go do the activity together. How will we prepare it? Gives you some time in the kitchen together. Doing all of those things is a part of reducing that exploration of food and making them more comfortable with the food to begin with. So I had one young lady who was very interested in trying new foods, and she was doing this with her occupational therapist. She's in Minnesota. She calls me up on FaceTime and she says, Joan, I tried a mussel, and I'm trying really hard not to make a face because I don't ever want to eat an oyster or a mussel. That's just, I'm not going to get there. And she's so excited about it. I said, oh, that's great. Did you like it? She said, no, it was awful. And then she went on to describe to me all the reasons why it was awful. But she was so happy about that because it gave her a way to tell people what she had experienced. She was learning how to describe things. So that's a really important thing. And she was very happy to say she put that in her list of things not to eat when she moves out. So that's a process that we can go through and we can make age appropriate to help give exposure to foods, understand how food is grown, understand why foods are the way they are, smell the different smells, taste the different tastes, see the differences. So that's a way to kind of reduce that whole fear of eating new things over time. I'm looking forward to the conversation at the end. So how do I start? Well, you start with person-centered strategies. You go back to that feeding relationship and the trust component. So some of those techniques that we've just talked about with the tasting and the food preparation and all of that, that's a part of it. Understanding the sensory stages is a part of that person-centered piece. And then we start adding in some of these other things, these other tools. So some of the keys to success that I have learned over the years of working with families is that communicating is important. So talking about it is important. But whatever you do needs to be understandable to them. There needs to be a choice. There always needs to be a choice. And that's why I say use a safe environment, because no is always an option. And we always want to respect our child's no. That doesn't mean that you won't try again later. But in the moment that the person says no, say, okay, that's all right. And kind of walk away from that in that particular moment. And we do that for two reasons. One is because we promised we would listen with the intent to hear. And the other is by respecting your child's no, they learn that and of course there will be that pendulum where they learn it too well, but they learn that they have the power to control what happens to them. School is a very compliance-oriented environment, and my biggest worry is that our kids learn that they aren't allowed to say no when something is uncomfortable, something hurts, or when someone is hurting them. So that's true with food as well, and we can model that behavior by saying, okay, all right, so saying you have to take a bite, we're going to say, okay, all right, put it to the side, it's all right, we'll deal with that later. You can come back and introduce it again. So let's look at some of the more specific tools for your toolbox. Things like visual strategies, pre-teaching, video modeling, cooking in the kitchen, role play, repeating things over and over. if your child has Down syndrome, there's a thing called a groove, which is just a habit. Those of us with older ones, we know this really well. Everything has to go in order. And what you can do is you can start working on that order now and create some healthy grooves, some grooves that you want to see. I eat a vegetable at every meal. So my son knows that there has to be a vegetable on his plate or I haven't done my job, and he'll come back and he'll look at me like, where's the vegetable? Where's the vegetable? And I've spent a few times saying, I'm working on it, or we're all out. So that's an important thing, to have that groove. List making, if your child has Down syndrome, list making is big. Lots of people like to make lists. So help them, they can make lists by making the grocery list, by listing what foods they're going to try, try to stay away from making a list of foods I hate. So let's make a list of the things we're willing to try, the things that we like, what we want things to look like, that kind of thing. Tasting, the engagement, and then support for the support. If you have a personal support worker, you want to make sure that you're coaching them and how to do this in a positive way. That's an important aspect of that for our kids. And then the other piece, this is more around weight management, so it doesn't really fit too well. But these are some ways that I've tried to make weight tangible. But this one right here, I got to get one more click in. This one right here, hugely important tool. If you have not discovered Time Timer, it's a terrific tool for all sorts of things. Like if your child is choosing not to eat anything at the meal, and I probably should come back to that, but so we have lots of time. But if your child is choosing not to eat anything at the meal, there's a participation expectation at a family mealtime. So I expect you to be at the table and be positive and have a conversation with us for 10 minutes. And you can set the time timer. The great thing about Time Timer is it doesn't ding, or you can set it to not ding, so they don't know it's gone off. So they make them big, they make them little. It's a visual timer. You see the time disappear. You can also get it as an app on your phone. And I like to use that. It's really kind of fun. And I make it clap at the end sometimes. So that's a great tool. I love Time Timer. Let me go forward. I have other tools to show you in a minute that are more appropriate. And then a place to begin is to return to those person-centered strategies. We've talked about a few tools, but you want to come back to what's important to your son or daughter about mealtime and about food. What's important to them? What's important for them? So what's important for them are those things that fall into health and safety. So it's important for them to eat a balanced meal. It's important to them maybe to make the choices. So how do we do that? Do we set up a menu? I used to post a menu, and a lot of people benefit from this one, where you write down the menu of what you're going to make for dinner and put it somewhere so everybody can see it. And I've used this with a number of people with Down syndrome, and their mothers love it because instead of having to answer the question every time they ask what's for dinner, what's for dinner, what's for dinner, you send them back to the menu to look at the pictures or read the words, what's for dinner, it's right there on the menu. And you don't have to answer it anymore. They can answer their own question, learn to go to the menu board to look. I had to do it for my own son, who does not have disabilities, because he would ask me all the time. So I would post the menu and say it's on the board, and he'd have to go look at it. But what's in that moment, what's important to them is to know what's coming. And if you have a picky eater, sometimes knowing what's coming is important. That's part of that preparation stage of being ready for what's coming, especially if food is a traumatic thing for you. So that's another part of the important to them. And then looking at what works and what does not work, so that you're really kind of focusing in on the ways that your son or daughter responds to things, so that you're looking at the positive things, the way that will work well, and try to stay away from the way that doesn't work well. Dollars to donuts, what doesn't work well is saying you have to sit at the table and eat that thing, and you have to sit there until tomorrow comes if you don't eat it. that strategy that was used by our parents, or my parents' generation, I'm not sure who, but in past generations, has been shown by research not to work. So pressure is not the way we want to go. We want to go for building on success, finding success, building it. So I want you to start thinking about one thing that you would like to focus on in one area, and what that might be. I already have an idea in my head of something that I've skipped over that you probably need to know or would want to know, but I'd rather stop here and maybe take some questions.